And it's good to have you with us, David.
Thank you. I need to put some glasses on. I've needed to put glasses on for quite a long time. So thank you. Thanks, Mark, for giving me the opportunity to speak today. And it's good to see lots of familiar faces. It's been quite a while since I've been stood here. What I'm going to really annoy you all, actually, because I've got a survey that I'd love you to fill in, and we're going to put some details up about it. Don't fill it in now, but if you can fill it, I know Sarah's not going to, but if you could fill it in before you leave here, it's on a phone, you can do it on a phone, that would be fantastic, it would be really helpful, and I'll just explain why. So, as Mark said, I work for Tearfund, which is just as he's described it, and I lead our peace-building team in Tearfund, which is a growing need, as I think some of the prayers have said. And a few years back, we redid our peace-building. We thought we'd better have a strategy. So we wrote a peace-building strategy, and I sent that round to the various countries where we work for them to comment on. And they were very gracious. The various country directors and country teams came back and said, David, yeah, this is fine. Yeah, we're quite happy with this. However, we do have one comment. And I went, okay, right, what's that? And they said, you seem to see the problem of conflict of sitting with us. And we recognize that we have challenges. We've got challenges of our leadership. We've got challenges of corruption. We've got all sorts of challenges in our countries that we're facing. And, you know, we love the parts of your strategy that will help us address that. But you seem oblivious to your own role in all of this. And I went, what? And they said, I mean, let's face it, you spend more on weapons than all of us put together. You export more weapons, many of them to our countries. And you fight more wars than all of us put together, pretty much. Many of them in our countries. So thank you for what you've got in this, but maybe, perhaps, you ought also to just take a little tiny peek at the log in your own eye as well. I have to say, I was a bit dischuffed at that point. I was a bit put out. I thought, Humph, what do you mean? We're a force for good in the world. We're out there saving the world from evil, from oppression. We're the good guys. But they do have a point. And this year is, as you well know, the 80th anniversary of the end of the Second World War. It's the 80th anniversary of the dropping of the nuclear bombs, the atomic bombs on Japan. It's the 80th anniversary of the setting up of the United Nations. And that seems to me a good time for us to reflect on how we as a nation and as nations of the world think about security, how we think about defense, and where we put our priorities in how we go about achieving that security. And I was actually in Germany for VE Day. I was in Frankfurt. And on that morning, I had a bit of spare time, and I walked into the cathedral in Frankfurt. And as I walked in, there's a big black and white photograph of the cathedral, presumably taken in about 1945. And it showed a very battered cathedral standing alone amongst just rubble everywhere. And clearly that was the result of Allied bombing. And as I stood there, I thought about also the bombing of Dresden. It took place, I think, in about January, February 1945. And for those that don't know, in 3 nights of Allied bombing, the city of Dresden was razed to rubble. And more people died in 3 nights of bombing than have died in Gaza so far. So just think about that level, that intensity of bombing going on. And then, of course, we had the atomic bombs as well. And that's the good guys doing that. I'm not commenting on the decisions that were made. I'm not commenting on the courage or disparaging the courage of the bomber crews that did that. They were decisions that had to be made then. I'm just trying to highlight the fact that when we end up going to war, horrific things happen. And the good guys get involved in those horrific things as well. And we tend to sort of somewhat gloss over those points. And as well as doing the survey, what I really, really would love us all to do, not just here, but Christians everywhere, people of faith everywhere, is to really think about what security means to us. What are our priorities for security? Where do we look to for our security? How do we ensure our security? Look at how our nations behave. Look at that log in our own eye. And ask ourselves some hard questions to test the assumptions. To hold that up against what we say we believe. To hold that up against the teachings and practice of Jesus. And see how well they fit. And those are difficult questions to ask in a difficult context. And I don't for a moment think there are any right answers in this. But I think most of us, and most Christians in the world, certainly in the UK, have sort of assumed a worldview that we've grown up with and not challenged it or questioned it. And I think particularly in the current context, we need to do that. According to, Sarah asked me if I had any data to base this on, so I'm going to give you some facts now, Sarah. According to UNHCR, 1 in every 69 people, or 1.5% of the world's population, is now forcibly displaced. And that number has doubled in the last 10 years, almost doubled. And most of that displacement is due to armed conflict. It's due to war. You know, some of you know I've got 2 grandchildren, and the thought of them having to live through the 7th of October in Israel, what's happening in Gaza, what's happening in Sudan, what's happening in Myanmar, DRC, so many countries around the world, is horrific. And that should be a motivation for all of us to work for peace. We prayed for peace earlier, and it reminded me of a saying from a great guy called Dan Buttry, who'd taken a lot of our peace training. And he says that peace, like war, must be waged. It's an active thing. It doesn't just happen. You have to go out and build peace. Last year saw the greatest number of active wars since the end of the Second World War. That should make us think about the approach we take to ensuring peace. Is it working? That data would suggest not very well. You know, those who lived through the Second World War, were people who had experienced the reality of war. And they were the people that created the United Nations with its famous preamble, which says, we determined to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. They were determined because they knew the reality of war and what it is. And yet, today, there are very few leaders who know that reality, certainly amongst the most powerful countries. And the language we hear now is of security through power, through force, through oppression, through dominance, through dominating. You know, last Monday, the government published the Strategic Defence Review. And I think, you know, the Prime Minister, his quote was, we need to become a battle-ready, armour-clad nation. I don't know how that makes you feel. I don't know how that resonates with what Jesus might think, what our faith might say. You know, our security comes through intimidation and through threat. It's a philosophy that is based on fear. You know, we prefer to call it deterrence. But deterrence is basically a big bloke with a big stick saying, come near me and I'll hit you harder than you can hit me. Again, there's a bit of a tension there with how I understand the gospel and how I see Jesus' sort of stance and practice. According to the International Institute, I'm nearly there. According to the International Institute of Strategic Studies, the world spent $2.46 trillion on defense last year. And that's an increase of $0.22 trillion on the year before. If, like me, you struggle with the zeros in that, $0.22 trillion may not sound very much. but it's 220 billion US dollars, an increase of. And at the same time, we say we can't afford to address the effects of climate change. I wonder. Who's spending that money? More stats for you. 40% of it, that's 968 billion, is spent by the United States of America. 10% is spent by China. 6% by Russia. It's about 176 billion. And just a little aside, NATO countries have paid Russia since February 22, have paid Russia 330 billion US dollars for hydrocarbons. So we're now being asked to spend more on defense to protect ourselves against a Russian armed force that we've just paid for. Work that one out. How do those priorities sit with our faith? I just think that we as Christians have a better story to tell than this story of safety through power. A colleague of mine says that security is relational. I cannot be secure unless you are secure. We have to work together on these things. It is difficult. It is challenging. Building peace is hard, and sometimes it will fail. But we really need to think about how we do this, what we as Christians have to say about this, whether we need to be speaking into this situation and calling for a different way of building relationships with different countries, a different way of resolving the challenges that will always come between countries. And yes, we probably do still need some armed forces. I'm not turned into a raving pacifist. But I think we need to try a damn sight harder at actually building peace in the world. So please do fill in the survey. There'll be a thing coming up at the end, if not now, to do that. There's a few hard copies as well. But most of all, talk about this. Discuss it. You may fundamentally disagree with me, and that's absolutely fine. But because there is no right answer. But discuss it, debate it, talk to your friends about it, post on Facebook or whatever. Talk about it, argue about it. Because in that discussion, we need to have this discussion going on, particularly in the current climate. So thank you very much. For those of you who may disagree with me fundamentally, please do so. Very happy to be disagreed with, but probably over coffee. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, David. Just put it back up again once more.